Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. You are now watching the second part of the video where I explain how I learn vocabulary, a task I focus on a lot when learning foreign languages. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the Uruguayan polyglot, a guy who speaks 8 tongues. If you're like me and you also enjoy learning foreign languages, then you might consider subscribing to this channel. If you have not watched my previous episode on this topic, I encourage you to check it out right here. In essence, I said that I create lists of vocabulary which I will often check and update. When I do this, I start with the most challenging words so far, then I move on to the newly acquired ones, and I wrap up by checking a random sample from the list. After doing all that, I'll move on to the final step of the process, which is what I'm going to talk about in today's video. The goal now is to work in depth on the words that I'm trying to learn. The structure I'm going to follow today is, firstly, I'm going to explain why I always create my lists in a digital format, and then I'll move on to explaining the final step of the process, which can be split in 3 parts. Donc, c'est parti! Firstly, I want to briefly outline why I gather my words in a digital format rather than on paper. The main line of argumentation I've heard so far in the debate, handwriting versus typing, defending the former position, is that when you write something by hand instead of typing it, you are doing a slower process, and thus you are internalizing that information better. In fact, this has been proven repeatedly in several studies. Writing involves intricate movements that activate more areas of the brain, and this increased brain activity gives your brain more hooks to hang your memories on. Although I do not deny that there might be certain advantages of doing a vocabulary list on paper, the reason why I prefer to do it in a digital format is that the benefits outweigh the costs. These benefits are, as I see them, twofold. For one, digital lists are flexible. That is, you can move words up and down the list depending on factors such as how recently you added that word to the list, or how long you think it's gonna take you to remember it. As you have seen in my previous video, this is crucial for me since I am constantly changing the location of the words in the list. And two, digital lists are portable. That is, you can take them wherever you want with your smartphone, or if you created them on your PC, then you can just sync them with your phone through the iCloud in a productivity boosting Ali Abdaal way. This allows me to check the list from wherever I am. Coming back from work? No problem, I might just have a look at the list. Am I going to the hairdresser? I might just check the list on the go. Or maybe I had some German beers on the other side of Berlin and now have to travel back home for 1 hour. Luckily, I have my list with me. On the contrary, if I noted down the words I want to learn in a notebook, it would be rather cumbersome to carry it around. To sum up, even though by creating a digital list I'm missing out on some extra brain stimulation that comes from handwriting, the ability to move the words across the list quickly and to check it from wherever I am will allow me to structure the words better and to have many more iterations with them, which will increase my retention in the long run. Having made this remark, let's move on to the final stage of the process, which can be divided in 3 parts. The first step consists in reading the words out loud. I usually do this between 2 and 5 times in a row, depending on how difficult I deem the word to be. While repeating it, I pay close attention to how it sounds, trying to retain that chain of sounds in my brain as much as possible. And if I'm repeating a noun, I try to imagine that noun at the same time that I'm repeating that word. This is very useful for 2 reasons. Firstly, because it's an active activity. You're not just passively receiving that information through your eyes while reading it, you're using your vocal cords in order to transform it instead. That is, you're making the active effort of decoding the sounds of that word and of pronouncing that word, which will make you remember it better. Let's see an example of how I would go about it. Костер, 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 возвратиться, возвратиться. Secondly, because it's very useful to listen to the word. This way, you're increasing the amount of channels through which you perceive that input. Now you're not only reading that word, you're also listening to it. Before writing the script, I have never checked whether there was any sort of empirical evidence that would back up this point, so I decided to Google it. And as I suspected, there are a few studies that prove my point. For instance, a study done by the University of Waterloo, the Canadian Waterloo, I mean, not Napoleon's one. The study Learning, Memory and Cognition, issued in 2010, is also relevant. In this second paper, the researchers documented what they call the production effect. The participants in this research were given the task of studying a list of words. They had to read half of them out loud and the other half silently. As you can imagine, the words that were read out loud were way better remembered than the ones that were read silently. So yeah, as you can see, my intuition and experience over the years has been proven correct. The second stage consists in writing down examples of the words I'm trying to learn. Context is crucial in language learning. If you learn a word within a string of words, you are more likely to remember it. You'll know, for instance, in which position of the sentence that word is usually located, what other words usually precede it, and what preposition usually goes next to it. This is why I always make the effort to add an example adjacent to the word I'm trying to learn. As I said in my previous video, when I first come across a word, I try to note it down in my list together with the sentence where I first found it. Or if I forget to do this, or if I do not have time to write down the exact example, I just Google the word I want to learn plus the word example, and then I will find tons of examples where the word I want to learn is put in context. I'll then choose one of the examples I come across and add it to my list. But merely doing this is not enough for two reasons. One, just learning one example would not be a holistic training. You'd only associate that word with that specific context of that example, and thus you'd sometimes struggle to identify its meaning when it's paired with a different set of words. And two, words sometimes have different meanings. If you only restrict yourself to one example, you are not learning the word in all of its dimensions. You are not getting acquainted with the other 2 or 3 meanings that that word might have. So, what do I do to prevent myself from falling into this problem? Well, I change the examples every once in a while. By increasing the variability of the context, your brain will create different associations with that word, which in turn will increase the likelihood that you will understand the word the next time you see it in a sentence. One piece of advice to this point: the examples should be rather simple and easy to understand. That is, I avoid examples that contain words that I do not know yet. Increasing my vocabulary is already a tough game. I do not want to make it even tougher by choosing complex examples that force me to learn even more words than the ones I set myself up for. And now the final stage, which I decided to call play. So thus far I've read the word out loud and I've had a look at a few examples that contain that word. But interrupting the process here would mean missing out on maybe the most important part of the process, namely on creating something unique with that word. Thus, the final step of the process consists in devoting some time to create, on the spot, examples that contain the word that I'm trying to learn. I'll usually create between 1 and 3 different sentences. The more I'm struggling with the word, the more sentences I will create. Also, the type of sentence I will invent will vary slightly depending on the type of word I'm dealing with. If it is a noun that designates an object, I'll try to look for it at home and create sentences with it. Let's say I want to practice the Russian word растение, which means plant. I could be like, я купил это растение на Амазоне. Or let's say I want to practice the word for headset in Russian. Well, I'd be like, я использую эту гарнитуру для монтажа видео. Or in case the word is an adjective, it usually makes room for playing around with it a bit. Это здесь, это узкий. Это узкий. Это широкий. Широкий. Да. Or let's say I want to use the word intelligent in Russian, нарядный. I'd be like, мой друг ГБ очень нарядный, он свободно говорит на 7 языках. And if I'm trying to learn a verb, I'll try to play around with both the person and the tense of that verb. Let's now assume I want to practice the Russian verb ожидать, which means to expect. I could start with a sentence in the past tense and the third person plural, such as мои друзья не ожидали нового от этого канала. And then I try to create a sentence maybe in the present tense, using the first person singular, such as я ожидаю, что зрители этого видео поставят лайк. As you can see, it's all about playing around. You're creating real sentences with things that surround you, or by telling about something you did in the past, or by talking about people you know. There might be several reasons as to why this is a good idea. One of them is that it allows you to discover things in your target language that you either don't know or that you know but you're starting to forget, such as words, cases, and tenses you came across a long time ago. For instance, let's say I want to create a sentence with the Italian word zaino, which means backpack, and I want to say that my backpack has a lot of zips. But then I realize that I do not know the Italian word for zip. I look it up and then I can create the sentence. Il mio zaino ha molte cerniere. That is, it's an organic way of discovering your weaknesses with the language. And by improving your weaker points, you're actually boosting the level of your target language. But the main reason as to why I think that this sort of practice is a good idea is that it's the most fun part of the whole process. Now you're doing something creative instead of merely going through a list of words. This is important because it allows me to enjoy the practice session a bit more and thus makes me more likely to go through it again on the day after. So that was it. Those are the 3 steps I follow in this last stage of my word learning process. As I said in my previous video, this is my own take on this subject. It has worked pretty well for me, but it might have its flaws as well. please feel free to point at them. And at the same time, if you got some interesting insights from this video, you are also free to let me know in the comment section below. Thank you for watching and see you next time.